Have you ever felt like an avoidant was playing games with your emotions, giving you just enough attention to keep you hooked, then pulling away the moment you got close? You're not imagining it. Avoidants, whether they realize it or not, often engage in specific emotional patterns that can feel like elaborate games designed to keep you off balance, chasing, and never quite secure in where you stand. These games are so subtle, so perfectly crafted that you start wondering if you're losing your mind. You question your own perceptions, blame yourself for being too needy, and convince yourself that if you just play along better, you'll finally win their consistent love and attention. The cruel reality? Most avoidants don't even know they're playing games. These patterns developed as survival mechanisms, ways to maintain emotional safety while still getting some of their connection needs met. Understanding this doesn't make the games less frustrating, but it does give you the power to stop playing along. In this video, you'll discover the most common emotional games that avoidants play, why these patterns feel so addictive and confusing, and most importantly, how to win by refusing to play their game entirely. Because the only way to beat someone who's playing emotional chess while you're trying to have a real relationship is to stop moving your pieces according to their rules. The first game is probably the most maddening one in the avoidant playbook, the hot and cold switch. One day they're texting you constantly, making plans, acting like you're the center of their universe. The next day, radio silence. They're distant, distracted, treating you like you're barely an acquaintance. Just when you start to pull back and protect yourself, they flip the switch again. Suddenly they're warm, attentive, and acting like nothing happened. Why do avoidants play this game? Because it gives them the perfect balance of connection and control. When they're being hot, they get their need for intimacy met. When they switch to cold, they get their need for independence and emotional safety. They're essentially regulating their own emotional temperature by using your reactions as a thermostat. The hot phase feels so good that you start craving it. You begin analyzing their every text, looking for signs of which version of them you're going to get today. Are they going to be the person who calls you beautiful and makes you feel like you're the only one who matters? Or are they going to be the person who responds to your heartfelt message with okay and leaves you wondering what you did wrong? This game is particularly cruel because it keeps you in a constant state of emotional alertness. Your nervous system never gets to relax because you're always bracing for the switch. You might find yourself walking on eggshells during the hot phases, terrified of doing something that will trigger the cold phase. Or you might find yourself desperately trying to recreate whatever you think caused the hot phase in the first place, but the switch has nothing to do with you. Avoidants switch to cold, not because you did something wrong, but because the hot phase started to feel too intense, too vulnerable, too much like they might lose themselves in the connection. The cold phase is their way of reasserting their independence and reminding themselves that they don't need anyone. So how do you win this game? You stop playing. You stop analyzing the temperature changes. You stop adjusting your behavior based on which version of them showed up today. You maintain your own emotional temperature regardless of theirs. When they're hot, you don't get overly excited. When they're cold, you don't chase or try to warm them up. You stay consistently yourself. This consistency drives avoidants crazy because it removes their control over the emotional dynamic. They can't use your reactions to regulate their own emotional state anymore. Some avoidants will escalate the hot and cold behavior at first, trying to get a reaction. Others will actually start to stabilize because they realize the game isn't working. The second game is just as frustrating but much more subtle, the breadcrumb trail. This is the avoidance way of keeping you interested without actually committing to anything real. They give you just enough attention, affection, or hope to keep you from walking away, but never enough to make you feel secure or satisfied. It's like they're feeding you emotional scraps while you're starving for a real meal. This game shows up in countless ways. They might text you good morning every few days, just when you're starting to forget about them. They might drop hints about future plans that never materialize. They might give you incredible physical intimacy but refuse to talk about feelings. They might be emotionally available for deep conversations at 2 a.m. but act like strangers in public. Why do avoidants play the breadcrumb game? Because it allows them to keep you as an option without having to deal with the scary reality of a committed relationship. They get to feel wanted and desired without having to reciprocate at the same level. They get the benefits of connection without the vulnerability that comes with truly letting someone in. The breadcrumbs feel so precious because they're rare. When someone who's usually emotionally unavailable suddenly sends you a sweet text or shows you a moment of genuine care, it feels like winning the lottery. Your brain releases the same chemicals it would if you were actually in a loving, consistent relationship, even though you're getting maybe 10% of what you need. This is why the breadcrumb trail is so addictive. Your brain starts to associate those tiny moments of connection with massive reward, so you keep coming back for more. You start reading deep meaning into the smallest gestures. A simple "thinking of you" text becomes evidence that they're finally ready to commit. A brief moment of eye contact becomes proof that they feel the same way you do. The breadcrumb trail keeps you in a state of constant hope and constant disappointment. You're always waiting for the next crumb, always wondering when they're going to give you a real meal. You start adjusting your expectations downward, convincing yourself that maybe this is just how love works with them, maybe this is enough. How do you win the breadcrumb game? You stop treating crumbs like a feast. You stop being grateful for the bare minimum. You start recognizing breadcrumbs for what they are, insufficient nourishment for a real relationship. When they drop a crumb, you don't get excited, you don't read deep meaning into it, you simply acknowledge it for what it is and continue living your life. The key is developing what I call breadcrumb blindness. You become so focused on your own life, your own goals, your own emotional well-being, that their occasional crumbs don't even register as significant events. This forces them to either step up with real consistency or step out entirely. Moving on to the third game, which might be the most heartbreaking of all, the future fake. This is where avoidants paint beautiful pictures of what your relationship could become, what you could do together, how amazing things will be once they work through their issues or once the timing is right. They get you invested in a future that they have no intention of actually creating. The future fake shows up as conversations about moving in together someday, talks about meeting each other's families, discussions about trips you'll take or goals you'll pursue as a couple. They might even get specific, talking about the house you'll buy or the adventures you'll have. These conversations feel so real, so intimate, that you start planning your life around these imaginary futures. Why do avoidants engage in future faking? Because talking about the future feels safer than committing to the present. They can enjoy the intimacy of shared dreams without having to take any actual steps toward making those dreams reality. The future is abstract, hypothetical, and therefore not threatening to their independence. Future faking also serves another purpose. It keeps you hooked without them having to change anything about their current behavior. They can continue being emotionally unavailable today while promising emotional availability tomorrow. They can keep their walls up now while painting pictures of a future where those walls come down. The cruelest part of this game is how real these conversations feel. When an avoidant starts talking about your future together, it doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like intimacy, like they're finally letting you into their inner world, like they're finally ready to commit. You start to believe that this is the breakthrough moment you've been waiting for. But then tomorrow comes, and nothing has changed. They're just as distant, just as unavailable, just as commitment-phobic as they were before the future fake conversation. When you try to reference the things they said about your future together, they either change the subject or act like those conversations never happened. How do you win against future faking? You focus on actions, not words. You stop being impressed by beautiful conversations about tomorrow and start paying attention to what's actually happening today. When they start talking about future plans, you listen politely but don't get emotionally invested. You might even say something like, "That sounds nice. Let's see what happens." The winning strategy is to live in the present moment. You make decisions based on how they're treating you right now, not on what they promise they'll do later. You stop putting your life on hold for hypothetical futures and start building the life you want with or without them. The fourth game is one of the most manipulative, even though avoidants usually don't realize they're doing it: the deflection dance. This happens whenever conversations start to get emotionally deep or when you try to address problems in the relationship. Instead of engaging with the topic, they deflect, distract, or completely change the subject. The deflection dance has many variations. They might suddenly remember something urgent they need to do. They might turn the conversation back to you and your issues. They might make a joke to lighten the mood. They might pick a fight about something completely unrelated. They might suddenly become physically affectionate to avoid emotional intimacy, or they might simply shut down and stop responding altogether. Why do avoidants deflect during important conversations? Because emotional depth feels dangerous to them. When you want to talk about feelings, the relationship, or problems that need addressing, their nervous system interprets this as a threat. Their brain starts sending signals that they need to escape, and deflection is their escape route. The deflection dance is particularly frustrating because it prevents any real resolution or growth in the relationship. You can never address problems directly because they won't stay focused on the topic long enough to work through anything. Every attempt at deeper connection gets redirected or shut down. You start to feel like you're going crazy because you can never finish a conversation about anything important. You might find yourself getting more and more frustrated, raising your voice or becoming emotional, which then gives them ammunition to deflect even more. They can point to your emotional reaction as proof that you're being unreasonable or dramatic. The deflection dance also trains you to avoid bringing up important topics. You start to anticipate their deflection and decide it's not worth the hassle. You begin to settle for surface-level connection because anything deeper gets shot down. You essentially learn to participate in your own emotional starvation. How do you win against the deflection dance? You refuse to dance. When they deflect, you don't chase the new topic. You calmly bring the conversation back to the original point. You might say something like, "I notice we've moved away from what I wanted to discuss. Can we get back to that?" If they continue to deflect, you don't get frustrated or emotional. You simply end the conversation. You might say, "It seems like this isn't a good time to talk about this. Let me know when you're ready to have this conversation." Then you walk away. You don't pursue, you don't argue, you don't try to force them to engage. The key is showing them that deflection doesn't work anymore. If they want to have a relationship with you, they need to be willing to have real conversations. If they're not willing to do that, then you're not willing to pretend everything is fine. Finally, we come to the fifth and perhaps most damaging game. The silent treatment weapon. This is when avoidants use silence as a way to punish you, control the situation, or avoid dealing with conflict. They don't just need space to process. They deliberately withhold communication as a way to make you feel anxious, guilty, or desperate for their attention. The silent treatment weapon is different from healthy space-taking because of the intention behind it. Healthy space sounds like, "I need some time to think about this. Can we talk tomorrow?" The silent treatment weapon is just disappearing without explanation, refusing to respond to reasonable attempts at communication, or giving you the cold shoulder until you apologize for something you're not even sure you did wrong. This game is incredibly effective because silence creates a vacuum that your mind will fill with worst-case scenarios. You start wondering if they're done with you, if you said something terrible, if they're talking to someone else instead. The silence becomes louder than any argument could ever be. Why do avoidants use silent treatment as a weapon? Because it gives them ultimate control over the emotional dynamic. They get to decide when communication resumes, under what conditions, and whether you've suffered enough for whatever transgression they believe you committed. It's a power play that puts them in the driver's seat of the relationship. The silent treatment also serves another purpose for avoidance. It avoids the messy reality of working through conflict. Instead of having to communicate their feelings, address problems, or find solutions together, they can just withdraw until either the problem goes away or you give up trying to address it. This game is particularly cruel because it attacks your fundamental need for connection and communication. Humans are wired for social connection, and deliberate silence from someone you care about triggers the same pain pathways in your brain as physical injury. The silent treatment literally hurts. How do you win against the silent treatment weapon? You refuse to be held hostage by someone else's silence. You don't chase them, beg them to talk to you, or apologize for things you didn't do wrong. Instead, you continue living your life. You make plans, see friends, pursue your interests, and maintain your emotional well-being regardless of their silence. The winning move is to treat their silent treatment like the information it is. Information about their emotional maturity and their ability to handle conflict in a healthy way. You don't try to fix it, change it, or work around it. You simply note it and respond accordingly. When they finally break their silence, you don't reward the behavior by being overly grateful or relieved. You address what happened calmly and directly. You might say something like, "I noticed you chose not to communicate for several days. That doesn't work for me in a relationship. If you need space, I need you to communicate that instead of just disappearing." The most important thing to understand about all these games is that you can't win them by playing better. You can't out-strategize someone who's playing emotional games while you're trying to build a real relationship. The only winning move is not to play. When you stop participating in these games, one of two things will happen. Either the avoidant will escalate their game-playing behavior in an attempt to regain control, or they'll actually start to engage in healthier patterns because the games no longer work. If they escalate, that gives you valuable information about their intentions and their capacity for growth. If someone's response to you setting boundaries is to become more manipulative, that tells you everything you need to know about whether this relationship is worth your investment. If they start to engage more healthily, that's also valuable information. It tells you that their game playing was more about unconscious patterns than intentional manipulation. It suggests that they might be capable of growth and change if they feel safe enough to drop their defenses. The key to winning without playing is developing what I call emotional independence. This means your emotional well-being doesn't depend on their games, their attention, or their validation. You maintain your own emotional stability regardless of what they're doing or not doing. Emotional independence also means making decisions based on your own needs and values rather than trying to manage their emotions or reactions. You stop walking on eggshells, stop trying to figure out their games, and stop adjusting your behavior to get better results from them. When you achieve emotional independence, their games lose their power over you. The hot and cold switch doesn't affect your temperature. The breadcrumbs don't satisfy your hunger because you're feeding yourself. The future fakes don't hook you because you're focused on the present. The deflection dance doesn't frustrate you because you're not trying to force intimacy. The silent treatment doesn't control you because your worth isn't dependent on their communication. This doesn't mean you become cold or indifferent. It means you become secure in yourself and clear about what you will and won't accept in a relationship. You can still love them, care about them, and hope for their growth while refusing to participate in dynamics that diminish your well-being. The beautiful thing about refusing to play these games is that it often forces the avoidant to confront their own patterns. When their usual strategies don't work anymore, they have to decide whether they want to develop new, healthier ways of connecting or whether they want to find someone else to play games with. Either way, you win. You either get a partner who's willing to grow and engage authentically, or you free yourself from a dynamic that was draining your emotional resources and preventing you from finding real love. What many people don't realize is that these games often become more intense before they stop working entirely. When an avoidant realizes their usual patterns aren't getting the desired response, they might temporarily escalate their behavior. The hot and cold switches might become more extreme, the breadcrumbs might become even scarcer, the future faking might become more elaborate, the deflection might become more aggressive, and the silent treatment might last longer. This escalation is actually a good sign. It means your new approach is working. But it's also the most challenging part of breaking free from these patterns because it requires you to stay strong when their behavior is at its most confusing and hurtful. Many people cave during this escalation phase and go back to playing the games, which only reinforces the avoidant's belief that these strategies are effective. Remember, you deserve a relationship where love doesn't feel like a game you have to win. You deserve consistency, authenticity, and emotional availability. You deserve someone who chooses you clearly and communicates openly rather than keeping you guessing about where you stand. The games avoidants play might feel familiar if you grew up in a household where love was conditional or inconsistent, but familiarity doesn't mean healthy. Just because you know how to navigate these games doesn't mean you should have to. Breaking free from these patterns requires courage because it means risking the loss of someone you care about. But it also opens up the possibility of finding something real, something nourishing, something that doesn't require you to be a master strategist just to feel loved. Have you found yourself caught up in any of these emotional games with an avoidant partner? Have you tried to win by playing better, only to realize the game itself was the problem? Share in the comments which of these games feels most familiar and what happened when you tried to stop playing along. If this helped you recognize that the only way to win these games is to refuse to play them, like this video and subscribe for more insights into building relationships based on authenticity rather than strategy. Thanks for watching.